1939. A Hollywood star, a British lady, an Oscar nominee. Her face hides scars. Her accent masks another voice. Her entire life story is a lie. Merle Oberon became the first person of Asian descent nominated for an Academy Award. No one knew it. She made sure of that. This is the story of a woman who erased herself to become a star. And when her beauty faded, everything faded with it. The Girl Called Queenie. February 19, 1911. Bombay. A city of extremes where British colonial grandeur existed alongside desperate poverty. In this city, a baby girl was born to circumstances that would haunt her for life. The birth certificate lists the parents as Arthur Terence O'Brien Thompson, a Welsh railway engineer, and Charlotte Selby. But the truth was far more complicated. Charlotte wasn't the mother at all. She was the grandmother, raising this child as her own daughter to hide a painful secret. The real mother was Charlotte's daughter, Constance. She was only 14 years old when she gave birth. Some sources suggest the pregnancy resulted from a troubling situation involving Charlotte's husband, Arthur Thompson. The family made a decision. They would raise the baby as Charlotte's child. Constance would be her sister. The truth would stay hidden. They named her Estelle Merle O'Brien Thompson, but everyone called her Queenie, supposedly in honor of Queen Mary, who had visited India with King George V that same year. The nickname stuck. For the first part of her life, she was simply Queenie Thompson, a child navigating a world that didn't quite know what to do with her. Arthur Thompson died in 1914 during World War I, not in battle, but from pneumonia at the Battle of the Somme. Queenie was only 3 years old. His death left Charlotte, Constance, and little Queenie in poverty. They lived in shabby flats in Bombay, scraping by however they could. Money was scarce, opportunities were fewer. The British Raj created rigid hierarchies and mixed heritage families occupied the lowest rungs. In 1917, when Queenie was 6, the family moved to Kolkata, hoping for better prospects. The city was massive, crowded, a center of commerce and culture. But for poor Anglo-Indians, it offered little improvement over Bombay. The discrimination followed them. The poverty remained constant. Queenie was a striking child. She had dark hair, distinctive features that suggested both her European and Asian heritage, and intelligence that showed early. Charlotte, despite their poverty, made sure she received some education. Queenie attended La Martiniere College in Kolkata, one of the better schools, though how Charlotte afforded it remains unclear. Perhaps scholarships, perhaps benefactors, perhaps sacrifices we can only imagine. But formal schooling could only take her so far. The question loomed larger as she entered her teens. What future existed for a beautiful but penniless Anglo-Indian girl in 1920s India? The British wouldn't employ her in positions of prestige. Marriage to a British officer or businessman was impossible given her background. The Indian community wouldn't fully embrace her either. By her late teens, Queenie had discovered one thing she could do exceptionally well. She could captivate people. She had presence. When she walked into a room, people noticed. When she performed on stage, audiences watched. She began acting with the Kolkata Amateur Theatrical Society in the late 1920s, appearing in local productions. The work didn't pay much, if anything, but it gave her a glimpse of possibility. She appeared on stage, drawing attention wherever she went. Theater offered something precious, a world where beauty and talent mattered more than bloodlines. On stage, she could become anyone. She could transform, and people responded to her performances with genuine appreciation. By the late 1920s, Queenie had become a notable figure in Kolkata's nightlife and theatrical circles. She was beautiful, charming, and increasingly aware that her looks could be her ticket out of poverty. But how? Where could someone like her go? Then one night at Furo's restaurant in 1929, her life changed. She met a man named Colonel Ben Finney, a former actor. He was charmed by her beauty and her ambition. They began a relationship. He promised he could help her get into films. He had connections to Rex Ingram, a director at Victorine Studios in France. If she was willing to travel to France, he would introduce her. It seemed like the opportunity she'd been waiting for. But then Finney came to her flat one night and saw Charlotte. Something clicked. He realized Queenie was of mixed ancestry. The relationship ended abruptly. Finney, like so many others, couldn't see past her heritage. However, to his credit, Finney kept his promise about the introduction. If Queenie was willing to make the journey to France, he would ensure Ingram knew about her. It wasn't much, but it was something, a thread of possibility in a life that had offered very few. With nothing to lose and everything to gain, Queenie and Charlotte packed their belongings and left for France. They arrived to find that Finney had already spoken to Ingram on Queenie's behalf. Though Ingram didn't offer her much, it was a start. She was in Europe now, away from India, closer to the dream of becoming someone else, reinventing Queenie. From France, Queenie made her way to London in 1928, 17 years old and determined. Charlotte came with her, though they told people Charlotte was her maid. This arrangement would continue for years. In public, Queenie barely acknowledged the woman who raised her, speaking to her only in Hindi when necessary. The pain of this must have been immense for both of them, but it was part of the price Queenie had to pay. London in the late 1920s was the center of the British film industry. Sound had just arrived, transforming cinema from silent pictures into talking pictures. Studios were scrambling to adapt. New stars were needed, ones who could speak as beautifully as they looked. Queenie worked as a hostess at the Café de Paris under the name Queenie O'Brien. The job required charm, beauty, and the ability to make wealthy patrons feel special. She excelled at it. Men admired her. She developed a sophisticated manner, learning to move through high society, even though she came from poverty. At night she worked the club. By day she haunted film studios, looking for any opportunity. She began getting small roles in films, mostly uncredited, under various names. She appeared in Alf's Button in 1930, playing a woman at a cafe table. Blink and you'd miss her. The W Plan the same year, another forgettable bit part. The pattern repeated throughout 1930, 1931, and 1932. She'd show up on set, deliver a line or two, maybe appear in the background of a scene, then disappear from the credits. For the Love of Mike Fascination. Wedding Rehearsal. Small parts in small films or small parts in bigger films. Either way, she was invisible, but she was learning. She watched how the established actresses carried themselves. She studied their movements, their speech patterns, their mannerisms. She was absorbing everything about how to be a British leading lady, even though she was getting no closer to actually becoming one. The frustration must have been enormous. Here was a young woman of extraordinary beauty, working constantly but getting nowhere. How many times did she show up for a casting call only to be turned away? How many producers looked at her and saw something exotic but couldn't quite place her? How many times did she have to smile and pretend rejection didn't hurt? And always the secret. Always the fear that someone would ask too many questions about her background. Where exactly did she come from? What was her family like? Could she provide references? She needed more than talent and beauty. She needed a champion, someone with power who believed in her enough to take a real chance. In 1932, that chance arrived. Alexander Korda, a Hungarian-born film producer and director, spotted her at a casting call for his new production company, London Films. Some accounts say he found her in the tea at the studio. Others suggest it was during a formal audition. What's certain is that he saw something special. Korda was building an empire. He had big plans for British cinema, wanted to create productions that could compete with Hollywood. He'd recently arrived from Hollywood himself, bringing American ambition to the British industry, and he had the eye of a man who understood star quality. Queenie Thompson had it. But Queenie Thompson, with her uncertain background and no polished story, wouldn't sell tickets. Korda offered her something precious, a contract, real roles, regular work. But there was a condition. She couldn't be Queenie Thompson. She needed a complete transformation. She would need a new name. Something exotic but not too foreign. Something memorable. Something that sounded like it could belong to aristocracy without being too specific. They settled on Merle Oberon. It sounded sophisticated, unusual, perfect for a leading lady. Merle had a musical quality. Oberon referenced the fairy king from Shakespeare, literary and cultured. Then came the backstory. This was crucial, perhaps even more important than the name itself. In the 1930s, Hollywood and the British film industry operated under strict racial codes. The Hays Code in America, which would be formally adopted in 1934, but was already informally in place, explicitly banned depictions of interracial relationships. It defined miscegenation as sex relationships between white and black races, and made such depictions grounds for denying a film approval for release. More than that, public sentiment was firmly against anyone who wasn't white occupying romantic lead roles. The very idea of a woman of mixed Asian heritage kissing white leading men on screen would have caused scandal. Theater owners in many parts of America and Britain would have refused to show such films. Audiences would have protested. A beautiful Anglo-Indian woman would never be a star. But a beautiful white woman from the British colonies. That was acceptable. That was even intriguing. So the story was crafted carefully. Merle Oberon was born in Tasmania, Australia. They said Tasmania, an island south of mainland Australia, was about as far from London and Hollywood as you could get while remaining in the British Empire. It was remote enough that few people could verify details. It was British enough to be respectable, and it had a certain exotic appeal, frontier territory, where records might be unreliable. She came from a wealthy British family, the story continued. Her father was a British Army officer who died in a tragic hunting accident when she was young. After his death, she moved to India to live with godparents. That explained why she'd spent time in India without being from India. The godparents provided her upbringing, her education, her cultivation. Then came the crucial detail. All her birth records were destroyed in a fire. It was tragic. Yes, but it meant verification was impossible. No one could check. No one could prove the story false. And who would question it? She looked the part. She sounded the part after the elocution lessons, and the studio was backing the story completely. The lie was just plausible enough and it was built to withstand scrutiny. Merle underwent elocution lessons to refine her accent. She learned to move, speak, and present herself as British aristocracy. And in 1933, Corder gave her the role that would launch her career. She would play in Berlin in The Private Life of Henry VIII, starring Charles Lorton. The film was a sensation. It became the first British picture nominated for an Academy Award for Best Picture. Mare's role was small but memorable. Her dark beauty and regal bearing as the doomed queen caught people's attention. Suddenly Merle Oberon was a name people remembered. More roles followed quickly. The Private Life of Don Juan in 1934 opposite Douglas Fairbanks. Then The Scarlet Pimpernel also in 1934 where she starred alongside Leslie Howard. She was beautiful, talented, and increasingly in demand, and through it all she maintained the fiction of her origin. No one questioned it. Why would they? But the secret followed her. Charlotte remained nearby, always in the background, officially her maid. When they appeared in public together, which was rare, Merle spoke to her only in Hindi, maintaining the fiction. The cruelty of this arrangement, the daily rejection of the woman who raised her must have weighed on both of them. But Charlotte understood. She had made sacrifices her whole life for this girl. This was just one more. Constance, her biological the web of deception grew more complex with each passing year. Eventually, some of them would try to discover the truth, but for now the secret held. Hollywood had its eyes on Merle now, and in 1939 she would land the role that would define her career. But first, she would need to navigate one of the most difficult professional relationships of her life. Wuthering Heights was being produced by Samuel Goldwyn and directed by William Wyler. The role of Kathy Earnshaw, the passionate doomed heroine of Emily Bronte's novel, was one of the most coveted parts in Hollywood. Multiple actresses wanted it. Wyler had his own ideas about casting. Laurence Olivier, already established as a serious classical actor, was cast as Heathcliff. Other, had married and had 4 more children back in India. Edna, Douglas, Harry, and Stanislaus. They were told Merle was their aunt, though she was actually their half-sister. He had a strong preference for who should play opposite him, Vivian Leigh, with whom he was having a passionate affair. When Merle was cast instead, Olivier made his displeasure clear. On set, he was difficult. He made cutting remarks. He questioned her interpretation of scenes. He found ways to undermine her confidence. For a woman already carrying the burden of maintaining a completely false identity, working with a hostile co-star must have been exhausting. But something magical happened when the cameras rolled. Whatever Olivier's personal feelings, his professionalism kicked in. And Merle, drawing on reserves of emotion she rarely showed in public, delivered a performance that transcended the backstage drama. Their chemistry on screen was electric. The scenes between Kathy and Heathcliff crackled with passion and pain. When Kathy declares that Heathcliff is more herself than she is, Merle's delivery makes you believe it. When she's dying and calling for him, the anguish feels real. The film was a critical and commercial triumph. Released in 1939, the same year Merle married Alexander Corder, it became one of the most celebrated romantic films ever made. Today, it's still considered one of the greatest adaptations of a literary classic, and Merle's performance as Kathy is remembered as her finest work, touching the stars. By 1935, Merle Oberon had caught the attention of Hollywood. Samuel Goldwyn, one of the most powerful producers in the industry, offered her a contract. She moved to the United States to star in The Dark Angel opposite Frederick March. The role was perfect for her. She played a woman who believes the man she loves died in World War I, only to discover years later that he survived but was blinded. It was melodramatic, emotional, and Merle delivered a performance that stunned critics and audiences alike. In 1936, she received a nomination for the Academy Award for Best Actress. At 25 years old, Merle Oberon was now a Hollywood star. What almost no one knew at the time and wouldn't know until decades after her death was that she had just become the first person of Asian descent ever nominated for an Oscar. Success brought opportunities. She worked steadily appearing in quality productions. These three in 1936, Beloved Enemy the same year. She was one of the most sought-after actresses in Hollywood. But success also brought scrutiny. Reporters wanted to know everything about the beautiful Merle Oberon. Where exactly in Tasmania was she from? What were her parents like? Could she visit Australia for publicity? Each question was a landmine. Merle developed skills in deflection. She gave interviews that revealed nothing concrete. She smiled and changed the subject. She claimed her family had quarreled with relatives in Australia, so she knew little about them. When pressed, she became vague, even ill. Back in Britain, her relationship with Alexander Corder deepened. They worked together frequently. He guided her career, introduced her to the right people, opened doors. There were rumors of romance, but Corder was married to someone else. Initially, their relationship was complicated, professional blending with personal in ways that made both more intense. Then came 1937 and everything nearly fell apart in an instant. The accident. March 1937. London. Merle was working on what should have been one of her greatest triumphs. I Claudius, directed by Isef von Sternberg and starring Charles Lorton. She was cast as Messalina, wife of the Emperor Claudius. The production was elaborate, expensive, and troubled from the start. On March 16, 1937, Merle was being driven in London when her car was struck by another vehicle. She suffered facial injuries, cuts on her face, behind her ear, on her neck. Initial reports downplayed the severity. The press was told she'd be fine. No disfigurement expected. Studio publicists worked to control the narrative, but the reality was worse than they let on. Merle's face, her fortune, her entire career depended on her beauty, and now she had scars, visible marks that makeup and careful lighting might minimize, but could never completely hide. On March 26, just 10 days after the accident, the production of I, Claudius was abandoned. Officially, it was because of Merle's injuries. The truth was more complicated. The production had been difficult with tensions between von Sternberg and Charles Lorton. Some believed Sayre used Merle's accident as an excuse to shut down a project that was spiraling out of control. Regardless of the reasons, the film was never completed. Decades later, the surviving footage would be featured in a BBC documentary called The Epic That Never Was, showing tantalizing glimpses of what might have been a masterpiece. For Merle, the accident created a crisis. She underwent consultations with specialists. The scars could be reduced but not eliminated. She would need special lighting for the rest of her career. And there was another problem emerging. In 1940, Merle's skin suffered additional damage from what was described as a combination of cosmetic poisoning and an allergic reaction to sulfur drugs. Some sources suggest these complications arose from attempts to lighten her skin tone. For a woman hiding her ethnic background, the desire to appear as pale as possible would have been overwhelming. Alexander Corder sent her to New York for treatment. She underwent dermabrasion procedures, painful and only partially successful. Her complexion would never be the same. Without makeup, the pitting and scarring were visible. But Merle was resilient. She had survived poverty, discrimination, the voyage to Europe, the reinvention of her entire identity. She would survive this too. The solution came from an unexpected source. The light called Obi. Lucien Ballard was a cinematographer, talented and innovative. He began working on Merle's films, including The Lodger in 1944, and he saw the problem immediately. The scars on her face, the uneven skin tone, the need for absolutely perfect lighting. Ballard invented a solution. He created a small light that could be mounted directly to the camera, positioned to illuminate the subject's face head-on. This light washed away imperfections, smoothed skin, and created a luminous glow. It became known as the Obi, named after Merle. The Obi became standard equipment in Hollywood. It's still used today, though few people remember it was created specifically to hide one woman's scars. Ballard's innovation saved Merle's career. It also sparked a romance. In 1945, Merle divorced Alexander Corder after 6 years of marriage. In June of that same year, she married Lucien Ballard. The man who literally made her beautiful on camera became her husband. The marriage to Corder had been turbulent. He was controlling, unfaithful, and their relationship had been as much about business as love. When Corder was Ned in 1942, Merle became Lady Corder, touching the aristocracy she had always pretended to come from. But the title couldn't save a broken marriage. Her marriage to Ballard seemed different. He understood her vulnerability. He had literally devoted his craft to protecting her image. And there was something poetic about a woman whose entire identity was visual, marrying the man who controlled how she appeared on film. But this marriage too would not last. By 1949 they divorced. The reasons remain private, but the pattern was emerging. Merle could not seem to find lasting happiness in her personal life. Her career, meanwhile, was entering a new and challenging phase. The descent. The 1940s had been busy for Merle. She appeared in 15 films during that decade. Some were successful. A Song to Remember in 1945, where she played French writer George Sand opposite Cornel Wilde's Chopin, was a particular hit. Berlin Express in 1948 was well received, but other films were forgettable. Night Song in 1947, Temptation in 1946. The quality was inconsistent, and more troublingly, the roles were becoming fewer. Hollywood in the late 1940s and 1950s was changing. Younger actresses were emerging. The kinds of romantic melodramas that Merle excelled in were falling out of favor, and Merle was aging, though still beautiful past 40, in an industry obsessed with youth. After Berlin Express in 1948, she didn't appear in another film for 4 years. When she returned in 1952 with Pardon My French, the gap was noticed. She made Desiree in 1954, playing Empress Josephine opposite Marlon Brando's Napoleon. It was a prestige production, but it didn't revive her career. Then the gaps grew longer. No films in 1955. One television hosting job in 1956 for assignment Foreign Legion. Nothing in 1957, 1958, 1959, 1960, 1961, or 1962. Silence. The woman who had been one of Hollywood's brightest stars was fading from view. In 1957, during this period of professional decline, Merle made a significant personal change. She married Bruno Pagli, an Italian-born industrialist. This was her third marriage, and notably, Pagli was not in the film industry. Merle was stepping away from Hollywood in more ways than one. With Pagli, she adopted 2 children, Bruno Jr. and Francesca. They lived in Cuernavaca, Mexico, in what was by all accounts a beautiful estate. Merle threw herself into a different kind of life. She became a hostess, throwing elegant parties. She collected art. She created homes that reflected her refined taste. But she never stopped being Merle Oberon, the star who couldn't reveal the truth. The burden of maintaining the lie never lifted. Charlotte Selby, her grandmother and the woman who raised her, had died in 1937, just months after Merle's car accident. Merle commissioned paintings of Charlotte from an old photograph, hanging them in each of her homes. Interestingly, in the paintings, Charlotte's skin appeared lighter than it had been in reality. Even in memory, Merle was editing the truth. The final attempt. In 1963, after a 6-year absence from the screen, Merle appeared in Of Love and Desire, filmed in Mexico. It was not a distinguished return. The film was mediocre, shot partly at her own estate and quickly forgotten. 4 years later, she appeared in Hotel in 1967, part of an ensemble cast in an adaptation of Arthur Haley's novel. It was a minor role in a minor film. By now Merle was in her 50s. The roles for women her age in Hollywood were scarce and rarely interesting. But she had one more project in her, and it would prove to be strangely prophetic. In 1973, Merle produced and starred in Interval, filmed in Mexico. The story followed an older woman who falls in love with a much younger man. Her co-star was a Dutch actor named Robert Walders, who was 36 years old. Merle was 62. Art imitated life. On set, Merle and Robert began a relationship. By 1973, Merle divorced Bruno Poli after 16 years of marriage. In 1975, she married Robert Walders, her fourth and final marriage, to a man 25 years her junior. Friends described Walders as devoted. He seemed genuinely to love her, and Merle, perhaps for the first time, seemed to find some measure of peace. They moved to Malibu, California, settling into a quiet life far from the Hollywood spotlight. But the secret still haunted her. In 1978, something happened that brought it all crashing back. The truth emerges. Michael Corder, Alexander Corder's nephew, was a successful editor and writer. In 1979, he published Charmed Lives, a memoir about his famous uncles and their wives. Merle, his aunt by marriage, was a central figure. Corder had researched thoroughly. He knew things about Merle's background, and while he tried to be discreet, the book contained revelations about her true origins. Merle was furious. She threatened legal action. According to some sources, she removed Corder from her will. The idea that the truth might come out after all these years terrified her. She had built everything on the lie. Her career, her marriages, her entire identity. What would happen if the world knew? In 1978, Merle and Robert visited Hobart, Tasmania. Robert wanted to see his wife's supposed birthplace. It was a mistake. The Australian press, naturally curious about their most famous Tasmanian daughter, pressed Merle for details about her childhood there. She couldn't answer. She became flustered, then ill. At a function held in her honor, under pressure from questions she couldn't answer, she finally admitted it. She hadn't been born in Tasmania. Then she collapsed. The admission was public. The lie was exposed, and Merle, who had spent her entire adult life maintaining the fiction, had finally run out of strength to keep it going. The end. November 23, 1979, Malibu, California. Merle Oberon suffered a massive stroke. She was 68 years old. Robert Walders was with her. She died that same day, November 23, in the home they shared. Her body was interred at Forest Lawn Memorial Park Cemetery in Glendale, California. The funeral was attended by friends, family, and a few old colleagues from Hollywood's golden age. They mourned Merle Oberon, the beautiful actress Lady Corder, the star of Wuthering Heights. But who exactly had they known? Who had she really been? After her death, researchers began piecing together the truth. The British Library's project to digitize records from British India included birth certificates. There it was. Estelle Merle O'Brien Thompson, born February 19, 1911 in Bombay, not Tasmania. The records she claimed were destroyed in a fire had been there all along. The full story emerged gradually. The young mother, the grandmother raising the child as her own, the poverty in Kolkata, the journey to Europe, the systematic construction of a completely false identity. Merle Oberon had been the first person of Asian descent nominated for an Academy Award. But she never knew that honor in her lifetime because she spent every day denying the heritage that would have made it meaningful. In 1985, Michael Corder published Queenie, a fictionalized version of Merle's story. It was later adapted into a television miniseries. The secret was fully public now, examined and discussed, the subject of books and documentaries. The Trouble with Merle, a documentary released in 2002, investigated the conflicting versions of her origin. Family members who had been told Merle was their aunt discovered she was their half-sister. The web of lies touched multiple generations, the weight of beauty. Looking back at Merle Oberon's life, it's tempting to judge the deception. She lied for 50 years. She denied her mother. She created an elaborate fantasy and maintained it even when it must have been exhausting. But consider what she faced. Born in 1911 to poverty and circumstances she didn't choose. Growing up in a society that despised people of mixed heritage, discriminated against by the British for not being white enough, discriminated against by Indians for being mixed, belonging nowhere, and then discovering she had one asset, her face. Her beauty was extraordinary, could be her ticket out, but only if she became someone else entirely. The 1930s offered no path for an Anglo-Indian woman to become a star. The Hay Code explicitly forbade interracial romance on screen. Immigration laws in America banned Indian immigrants and prevented those already there from becoming citizens. The industry, the culture, the entire system was designed to exclude people like her. So she made a choice. Become Merle Oberon, the Tasmanian beauty, and have everything. Or remain Queenie Thompson and have nothing. She chose survival. She chose opportunity. And yes, she chose to deny where she came from. But what else could she do? The tragedy is that her beauty, the thing that gave her entry to a glittering world, was also the thing that trapped her. She couldn't age gracefully because aging made her less valuable. She couldn't reveal her background because it would destroy everything. She couldn't even fully love the woman who raised her, Charlotte, without risking exposure. Lucian Ballard invented the obi to hide her scars, but Merle spent her life using an invisible obi, a carefully constructed light to hide the truth about herself. The scars from the 1937 accident were physical. They could be lit, covered, minimized. The scars from having to deny her identity, her mother, her history, those never healed. Those went deeper than any camera light could reach. A complicated legacy. Merle Oberon received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 1960, located at 6274 Hollywood Boulevard. Visitors walk past it without knowing the full story of the woman it commemorates. Her films remain. Wuthering Heights is still considered a classic. Her performance as Cathy opposite Laurence Olivier's Heathcliff is remembered as one of the great romantic tragedies on film. The Dark Angel, The Scarlet Pimpernel, A Song to Remember. These are part of cinema history, but her achievement is complicated by the lies. When Michelle Yeoh won the Academy Award for Best Actress in 2023, publications debated how to describe the milestone. Some called her the first Asian actress to win. Others added qualifiers. The first self-identified Asian actress, acknowledging that Merle Oberon had been nominated, but never identified as Asian during her lifetime. It's a painful distinction. Merle could have been celebrated as a trailblazer. Instead, she's remembered as a woman who hid, but she hid because the alternative was impossible. Her story raises uncomfortable questions about Hollywood, about beauty, about identity. What does it mean when someone has to erase themselves to succeed? What does it say about the industry, the culture that made such erasure necessary? Merle Oberon was not a villain. She was not a hero. She was a woman trying to survive in a world that gave her very few options. She used the tools she had, her beauty, her intelligence, her determination, and she paid a price for it that can't be calculated. She touched royalty when she became Lady Quarter. She lived in luxury, married 4 times, adopted children, traveled the world. By conventional measures, she succeeded. But she never got to be fully herself. She never got to acknowledge the woman who raised her as anything more than a servant. She never got to claim the distinction of being the first Asian person nominated for an Oscar. She never got to tell the truth, fading away. The arc of Merle Oberon's career and life followed a familiar pattern. Rise to fame through beauty and talent, a peak of success and recognition. Then a slow fade as youth departed and the industry moved on. But for Merle, the fade was more than professional. It was existential. As her beauty diminished, so did the protection it provided. The lie became harder to maintain. The questions became more insistent. The energy required to keep up the fiction grew heavier with each passing year. By the time she admitted the truth in Tasmania in 1978, she was 67 years old. She had lived as Merle Oberon, the Tasmanian beauty, for nearly 50 years. The confession, when it finally came, broke something in her. A year later she was gone. Robert Walders, who had been with her at the end, later had a relationship with Audrey Hepburn. He seemed drawn to beautiful, complicated women. When asked about Merle, he spoke of her with affection and respect. He had known the truth about her background and loved her anyway. Perhaps that's what allowed Merle some peace in her final years. The woman born as Queenie Thompson in Bombay, had traveled an impossible distance. From poverty and discrimination to the heights of Hollywood glamour. From the slums of Kolkata to the drawing rooms of British nobility. From obscurity to immortality on film. She had touched everything she dreamed of touching. And in the end she faded away like the final frames of a movie, leaving only the images behind. Those images remain beautiful. Merle Oberon on screen, perfectly lit, perfectly presented, perfectly hiding the scars both visible and invisible. The face that launched a career, the lie that made it possible, the truth that finally emerged. She was the first Asian person nominated for an Academy Award, though she never claimed that honor. She was a survivor who made impossible choices in an impossible time. She was a woman who wanted desperately to be accepted, and found that acceptance required denying everything she was. Merle Oberon touched royalty. She lived among the stars. And when her beauty faded, when the lights finally dimmed, she faded with them, taking her secrets to the grave. Only after she was gone did the world learn who she really was. And by then it was far too late for that knowledge to set her free. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more fascinating stories.